We often hear that diversity, equity, and inclusion matters to businesses, but their data tells a different story. So what is the missing piece? On Finding Diversity, we tell real stories of what has worked for others and provide experiences that will inspire you. I'm Justus Thompson, and this is where our journey begins. Welcome to the latest episode of Finding Diversity, the missing piece. Today, we are joined by a special guest, Toby Mildon, who is a renowned diversity inclusion expert with extensive experience working with some of UK's largest companies, including the BBC, Sony, Deloitte, and HarperCollins Publishing. Toby is a certified diversity and inclusion strategist, speaker, and author who has dedicated his career to promoting inclusive cultures. We are thrilled to have Toby on the show today and share his insights, experience in creating inclusive environments. I'm your host, Justus Thompson, and let's get started. Welcome, Toby.
Hey, Justus. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I am super excited to talk today, and especially about, I think, some topics that I think we both agree aren't quite as, I don't know if sexy is the right word, but definitely not talked about, I think, as much as as it should be. But let's start with this Cape U exercise. And so basically what that is going to be is something about my younger self, one thing about your culture, and something unique about me. I'll go ahead and start. So something about my younger self is my father actually worked at the United States Olympic Committee. So I was actually able to go to the Paralympics. And I was also able to go to Korea when the Paralympics was in Korea and helped give out gear to Paralympic athletes at that, which was a lot of fun. One thing I really like about my culture is freedom of speech, which may be controversial right now, obviously, as being in America, but I think it's good. I think the natural discourse that happens is great. I don't know if the divide is fantastic, but I think that the fact that we can talk and that tension is normal. The last thing is something unique about myself is I am actually allergic to plantains and bananas and anything off of that tree. I'm allergic to. I found out, of course, after I was eating bananas for years and years, having been an athlete and trying to recover, and found out that was actually what was making me really sick. So that was good. A little bit about me. So now, Toby, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to just jump straight in there and actually demonstrate some vulnerability by saying that when I was born with a genetic neuromuscular disability, and I've been a wheelchair user all of my life. And one thing that I talk about in the work that I do is the intersectionality between our different identities and characteristics. And so I talk about being or having a disability and being gay. And I think when I look back at my younger self, I don't think that those necessarily intersected very well, because a lot of the stereotypes that people have about disabled people in society, and about sexuality of disabled people as well. So it's a bit of a heavy one to start off with, I'm afraid, Justus. But I thought, well, why not? Let's just dive straight in.
No, it's fantastic. I think I do have a follow-up question with that. And I think for our listeners, there has been recently, I know in America, a conversation about terms that we use, disability versus people with disability. Can you help our listeners understand and grapple with kind of the conversation when they're trying to have this conversation? What are the terms that they should be looking out for, and how should they be looking to have this conversation?
Yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot with my clients around the importance of language, using the right language, which language makes people feel included or excluded. When it comes to disability, I mean, certain, I suppose this is from my perspective, coming from the UK. We often talk about the medical model and the social model of disability, and what the social model says, and this is kind of the preferred way of looking at things, is that people are disabled because of barriers that are created in society, not because of somebody's underlying condition or impairment. And so the preferred language in the UK around the social model of disability is to say disabled people, because the disability is created by those barriers. Um, but the jury really is out. I've done a kind of poll with my friends, and half of them prefer disabled people, half of them prefer person with disability. And really, the key thing here is to ask whoever you're talking to what their preferred language is. And this is not just about disability, it could be somebody's pronouns, it could be somebody's sexuality, it could be around race and ethnicity. It's always best to check in with them to see what they prefer, what their preferred language is.
One time for the people in the back. I totally agree with everything you just said. I get the question all the time. Why don't black people just like black, or is it African American? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
And there's a general census of, oh, most people like this, but it's the individual. What does that person prefer? And let's honor that person's what that person wants. So that's fantastic. So so well said. I love where we've jumped in right now, because I think there are some real issues that really aren't talked about enough when it comes to, number one, disability. But I want to get at intersectionality first. And you talked about something interesting, which is coinciding intersectionality as a person who has an intersectional identity, which we all have. But then how does a business look at intersectionality, and what does that mean for that business?
The I suppose what I try and encourage my clients to do is, first of all, recognize that intersectionality. Um, it might sound a bit simple, but I don't think a lot of business leaders think about it enough.
Mhm.
And often, when a company is developing its diversity and inclusion strategy, um, and I spend most of my time helping clients develop their strategies, they think in a
Mhm.
very kind of siloed way. So they'll say, okay, right, we recognise that we have a gender imbalance at the board level, or there's a particular part of the organisation where we've got a gender imbalance, like technology or engineering, where there might be more men working in that department than women, for instance. So what they'll do is they'll say, okay, right now our focus is on, we're just going to focus on gender. Um, and then what I saw few years ago after the murder of George Floyd over in the States is that organizations were like, okay, right, now we need to respond to the Black Lives Matter movement, and we need to talk about developing an anti-racism strategy for the organization. And they think in a very
Mhm.
kind of hierarchical and siloed way, and they don't really think about the intersectional nature of our existence, and how it and how we need to have like a joined up uh, plan or strategy when it comes to creating more respectful and fairer work environments.
Exactly. I think what you're saying really hits home with me, because I think some of the work that we've done is just that, right? When you look, it's amazing when you start looking at intersectionality, some of the insights that can really be drawn. That when you look at, let's say, turnover of women, and
Mm,
then you lay intersectionality on top of that, or you start getting a more complex view of what that is, you may actually find, even though women are leaving, the women who are leaving have a very interesting intersectionality about them. That maybe it's black women, maybe it's women with disabilities, maybe it's women who identify uh, in a certain way. Like, but those women tend to be turning over even more than women.
yeah,
And when you start getting intersectionality, I think to your point about strategy, right? All of a sudden the strategy changes because you've informed what you took as a very siloed approach. So I love that comment. I think it's so
yeah,
applicable.
and
Uh,
it's an inefficient way of working as well. I've worked in organizations where they've developed a career development program to get women into senior leadership positions, and then a few months down the line, they then develop another career development program for um, people from an ethnic minority background. And I've had those conversations with my colleagues who are from an ethnic minority background, where they've said, which program do I join? I'm a woman. Do I join the program for women, or do I join the program for people of an ethnic minority background, or can I join both? And I'm sat there thinking, why on earth are we doing this? Like, why don't we just have like one program which is like inclusive talent development? You know
Yeah.
that, and surely that's a much more efficient and effective way of working.
Yeah. I do think and it is somewhat dismissive of that intersectional experience of, in that example, like women of color. I've talked to a couple of colleagues recently about that, and they have told the same example. And they basically said, I always join the people of color group.
Mm,
And there is this imbalance where they feel like then the women's issues that get talked about are usually disproportionately those that are faced by white women,
yes.
which can be those faced by all women, but it misses a huge demographic, and it leads to a group of employees at your company not feeling seen,
Yeah.
not feeling like their needs are being taken care of.
Absolutely, I would agree with that.
Fantastic. Well, I'm gonna transition back to the first part of that question, which is disability. It's something that no one talks about. And let me ask first, do you prefer disability when we talk about in this conversation, or what term would you prefer when we have this conversation?
Yeah, disability is totally fine with me.
Okay. Fantastic. So when we talk about disability, it's not usually the first thing DEI professionals tackle, right? And we talked about it being siloed kind of at the beginning, but I'd like to get more in depth from your perspective. What's lacking in the field of DEI when it comes to disability, and what steps do we really need to take in order to move it forward?
I mean, this is a bit tongue in cheek. I think what is lacking is including disability in diversity plans or strategies that an
Mhm.
organization might be putting together. Um, we've got what, 7 billion people living in the world, and it's estimated that a billion have a disability. Within the UK, the government are estimating that 16% of working age adults have a disability. Um, and when I talk to my clients, they just don't have any actions in an action plan around disability inclusion. They are, I suppose, doing the bare minimum that's required of them by law, like in the UK, providing reasonable adjustments, which is detailed within our Equality Act. And I know in the States, obviously you've got similar legislation in place, but
Mhm.
um, it's I mean that's it. They're kind of scraping
Yeah.
by with the bare minimum there, and they're not even doing that particularly well. So
It,
yeah.
yeah, let's talk about that because I think that's such an important thing. What is the bare minimum, and what is actually going beyond that?
Yeah, so within the UK, I mean, in the Equality Act, we've got a duty to provide reasonable adjustments, which is a bit of a legal term. Um, I prefer to talk to my clients about workplace adjustments, and I I also like to help my clients think that workplace adjustments don't need to just be about disabled staff. That you can make
Mm.
workplace adjustments for all of your staff. It could be flexibility for working parents. It could be people who maybe experience mental health challenges and it's difficult to commute to work on a busy train, which makes them feel particularly anxious. And you could have some flexibility about when people start or finish their working day. So that flexibility or those quote unquote reasonable adjustments can actually benefit many more people than just your disabled community within the business. So this is really about thinking outside the box. It's being a bit kind of creative, a bit
Yeah.
innovative, and really thinking about how you can unleash the potential of people in your organization so that they can thrive.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I think what I heard is there's a bare minimum of what the government tells you wherever you happen to be that says you need to do. And then there's a step beyond that, and really moving beyond what is just mandated is being creative in the deliverance of the tools and methodologies we're looking at to create that flexibility.
Yeah,
Would that be
absolutely.
kind of
Yeah, yeah,
fantastic? Okay. So that's great. So I think one of the next parts I want to talk about is your journey. We have a lot of listeners who are maybe looking to get into diversity of inclusion or have been doing it for years. But I think one of the very interesting conversations is how people get into this work and how it resonated with you. So I'd like to get to you, like, when did you know obviously this is something you wanted to do, and how did you start making that transition into this field?
Yeah, I've had quite an interesting journey. So when I left university, I worked in technology. So I was an IT consultant for Accenture. I worked for an American healthcare technology company implementing software into hospitals. And then I worked at the BBC as a project manager, working on the BBC News website, BBC iPlayer, which is our TV on demand service, and
Gotcha.
accessibility projects. And I, I, I fell into diversity and inclusion um, kind of by accident, really. I used to work really closely with our chief operating officer, and
Okay.
he was concerned with the rest of the leadership team of the technology department at the BBC about the gender imbalance that we had in our department. So when I
Mm,
was there, only 14% of our workforce were women in the technology team,
wow.
compared to the rest of the BBC, which had a 50-50 gender split. So
Wow.
our department was out of balance. And I mean, we were in the same boat as Facebook and Google and Amazon in the engineering community. There is a gender imbalance across the industry. So to cut a long story short, they basically created a plan to get more women into tech, and they needed a project manager to run that plan. So that's where I volunteered and put my name forward. And then I quickly realized that I just really enjoyed working in this space. And I kind of joke that the BBC has a kind of a reorganization every fortnight, but I managed to move into the HR department and turn it into a full-time job and look after other BBC divisions like all of the corporate function services and radio before heading back into the private sector. I went to work for Deloitte for a couple of years,
Mhm.
looking at diversity, within the Deloitte firm in the city. So that's been my journey.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and I think I'm going to step on a soapbox here. I think who you work with matters, especially in this field. There are a lot of people who uh, are fantastic and very well intentioned, but there is a markable difference between someone who has held a position being in charge of diversity and inclusion and those who have not. And who you work with matters. And I got to say, Toby, very impressive story. And I think for anybody listening, any of our listeners, doing the work is the best way to get better at doing the work. So I think this is fantastic. Thank you for sharing
Yeah,
that.
you're welcome. You're welcome.
So the next part I want to kind of dive into, and I think it's really cool that we get to do this. But when you look at the U.S. and you look at the U.K., how is DE&I different, and how is it the same?
Um, I think we how it's different is that we probably have different conversations around race equality, for example. I think
Okay.
both the US and the UK have got similar history around race relations, but also different histories as well. And that kind of historical backdrop, plays into today's narrative. Um, I think where I like to draw similarities really is trying to get organizations to understand why, first of all, diversity and inclusion is important in the modern working world or the modern workplace. And that's where there's a lot of similarities between the UK and the US. And I suppose where I'd like to get my clients to, or a place that I'd like to get them to, is to really understand the strategic importance of it and how it helps them grow as a business. Um, Hence writing my book, Inclusive Growth. And I kind of deliberately, I suppose it was a deliberate attempt to reframe diversity and inclusion for businesses. That if you get it right, it will help your business prosper and grow. And I think that's as applicable in the UK as it is in the US.
100% would agree. I think, in my experience, companies have historically treated, at least in the US, diversity inclusion as an ampersand. And what I mean by that is we do X, we're a technology company, we create technology, and we do diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we try to help companies figure out is no, no, no. Diversity inclusion can be how you do technology. It can help you to do the thing you're doing. Don't make it an
Yeah,
ampersand. Bring it in line with your
absolutely.
business, because otherwise times get tough or something happens and you cut it
Absolutely. I
off.
mean, I've just finished working with a fintech organization, and we ran a diversity and inclusion survey first of all to understand what staff were experiencing in the business, and I spent some time with the board to help them understand the strategic importance of this and make sure that they were all on the same page and talking the same language. Um, and then the chief executive said to me, or she realized, she's like, I get it now. I can actually see a direct correlation between being inclusive and developing a much better, higher quality product that engages its end
It,
users. And I was just like, that is that is amazing. I'm really pleased that she's kind of joined up the dots. That, like you say, it's not the
it,
ampersand. It's part of the quality of the product that they are shipping.
and I got to those moments are why I'm still doing this. I remember we had something similar. We were in a boardroom, and I remember that the chairman of the board, this is a hospital system, get towards kind of the end of the presentation, fielding a bunch of questions, right? Obviously, because there's a bunch of, oh, this doesn't make any sense. This is not diverse inclusion. This is just in line with what we're already doing. And we're like, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And I remember the chairman just kind of looked around and said, same, I get it. Like this makes sense. This is what we
yeah,
should be doing. And I think it's that experience of really like kind of reframing their
yeah,
focus from this is a great thing and I'm very well intentioned and I want that to, oh, I need that for my business and this is directly in line with
yeah.
what we're doing
I,
is
I had I had the same
yeah.
as well recently. I've been working with a manufacturing client. And again, similar to this fintech, we went through the motions of doing the board engagement and doing the survey and putting a strategy together. And the chief executive then created like a vision statement for diversity and inclusion in his business. And then he was like, "But why are we creating like a separate D&I strategy?" Like, and then he was like, "You know what I'm going to do? This is without any prompting." He said, "I'm going to take the strategy that we've just developed and I'm going to like merge it into our kind of main business strategy. And we're going to sit it alongside our people strategy and our business development strategy and our everything else strategy." And I was like, thank God for that. It's like, the penny dropped. It just got embedded.
Uh, all I got to say is what I said earlier about who you work with matters. Toby, this is not something that most consultants have this story. So, like, if our listeners, I'm telling you right now, Toby knows what he's doing. When you have CEOs unprompted say, I need to rewrite our strategy. So this fits directly in our bit. That tells you the value of what Toby's able to deliver. That's just
Oh, thanks.
amazing.
I appreciate that.
that's, that's awesome. So, Toby, tell me a little bit about this book. So, you mentioned it kind of off the cuff. Can I get the
Yeah,
name
it's
again?
inclusive growth. Mm.
Inclusive growth. Can you tell us a little bit more about inclusive growth, why you wrote it, and what it's
Yeah, so
about?
the reason why I wrote it was because I was getting frustrated with seeing organizations treating diversity and inclusion as this kind of extracurricular activity, like you were saying, the ampersand on the side of the business. And then I was
Yeah.
thinking, okay, so those organizations that are doing it well, where they get it integrated and it's part of the DNA of the business, what are they doing? So I went out and did my research. I basically, I suppose, boiled it down to 7 key things. So my book covers these 7 key areas of how to get diversity and inclusion really embedded into your business, so that it's just the way that you conduct business.
Would you mind sharing the 7 things? I feel like the listeners are now like, what are they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so it's broken down into three sections really. And the first section is, first of all, we talk about clarity and culture, and this is getting very clear on why diversity and inclusion is important for your business, getting your hands on data and employee insights so that you actually start to address the right problems in the business, and you don't end up wasting lots of time and money trying to fix the wrong problem. And it's like, I don't one of kind of uh, a management guru that I love following is Simon Sinek, who wrote the book Start With Why. And one of his famous sayings that he did in his TED talk was, "People don't buy what you do; they buy why you do it." And I've just kind of paraphrased it into, "People don't buy into what you do; they buy into why you do it." So, as a business leader, you have to be really
Mm,
clear on why diversity and inclusion is important to your business. And then alongside that, you have to really think about what you want your culture to be like. A bit of a do a
mm,
temperature check on what is your culture like right now. Um, is it the culture? Is it the kind of culture that you want to have? Is it inclusive? Is it respectful? If not, what are some of the things that you need to, or what are some of the behaviors that you need to tackle to address your culture? So those are the first two areas, um, clarity and culture. Once we've done that, because that's kind of like the cornerstone really, is that we then get into we roll up our sleeves and we get into the actual implementation side of things. And the next three C's is change, colleague experience, and cyber. And in change, I really make the point that we need to be treating diversity and inclusion like any other change initiative in the organization. You need to be really clear on what outcomes you want. You have to be really clear on who your stakeholders are, what risks you're dealing with, what your roadmap looks like. Um, and again, it came out of a frustration, or I hear every single day of people working in this industry, that they just feel like they're spreading themselves too thinly, they're chasing their tails, they're not making the impact that they want to
yes.
make, and it's because they don't have that kind of change management rigor involved. And I mean, I came from that technology background. I've just I was so used to working in that environment, and then when I moved to HR, that just seemed to dissolve. And I was like, "Where's the project plan?" And they were like, "What's a project plan?" I was like, "Where's your stakeholder matrix?" "Oh, what's a stakeholder matrix?" So I was like, "Okay, right, we need to get some structure in this thing." Um, and then colleague experience and design is a really interesting one, because that it's kind of at the center of the model, and it's really about equity, and it's about treating people as individuals and trying to understand what people need
Mm,
in order to thrive. And again, I've pinched stuff from the disability world and the social model of disability, which is, let's identify the speed humps and the roadblocks that slow people down or prevent
mm,
them from completing an employee journey, whether that's getting through a recruitment process or getting promoted or becoming a parent for the first time, um, or another transition whilst at work, and really think about how we create those inclusive employee experiences. And then the next C is, as I mentioned, cyber, and this is really about how we can use technology. And there's two sides to this. First of all, how can we use technology to scale up what we're doing in D&I? There's loads of really cool apps and tech out there that can help us do our job better. And the other side of this, and again informed by my experience at the BBC, is how do we actually make sure that our technology is accessible for people who've got
mm.
disabilities? So many talent applicant tracking systems, for example, are not accessible. So there's no wonder that
Interesting.
people can't apply if it's not working with their assistive technology, for instance. So let's make sure that the tools that we're using, whether that's internal, like a learning management system or an intranet, um, or externally facing, like an applicant tracking system, or even your website to buy your products or services, are can be used by everybody.
It's such an important thing. I think you probably had this experience too, where you'll be talking with a client and they won't realize that the door has just been
Mm,
shut the whole time to a particular group. It's like actually you're complaining about no one being here, but you've never even opened the door for them to be able to
Yeah,
walk through, to be able to come in and actually engage. So I think that's such a great point to make
absolutely.
for people. Um, I also think this leads to an interesting kind of topical topic, I guess, which is AI in diversity,
Yeah.
equity, and inclusion. I think AI is all the rage right now. I have my own reservations about it for a couple of reasons. But before I prime you with anything, I just want to toss it over to you and kind of get your thoughts on AI and DE&I and what that intersection is like and what the future holds.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I suppose the big debate around AI is the bias that it adopts because
Mhm.
of the the bias that exists in the way that it's being developed. Um, uh, you know, I don't know if this is politically correct to say on the podcast, but when I worked in technology, we had this kind of saying of if you put crap in, you get crap out. you
You
know,
get crap
and
out.
it's so I think
Yeah.
we have to be really conscious of what bias is being created around this. But on the flip side, there's plenty of examples about how AI is actually helping us in the D&I space. So, being able to analyze the language that's being used in a job ad, for example, to make it gender neutral language, um, to being able to use AI in other parts of the recruitment process to try and uh, minimize the impact of bias, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I would totally agree with you. I think my reservation is, in honesty, how AI is coded, how it's created, right? And the fact that when you look at that industry, has not been a great industry for diversity and
Yeah.
inclusion, which tells you something. And having worked in the startup space now for several years and made a lot of connections in this space with other DE&I softwares and solutions, I think one of my biggest concerns is that when I look at those companies, and if you're a buyer of a product, I would encourage you to do this as well. There are any companies out there, when I look at their teams, they don't have anybody on their team that has actually held a diversity, equity, and inclusion position. And that
Mhm.
is dangerous because these topics and what you're trying to do when you try to code for implicit bias or these things, you really need an expert in the room to be able to inform, and they
Yeah.
need to be on the team. And I always think, like, when I see stuff like that, it really makes me question uh, what made them start this in the first place. Like, I love the initiative, but at the same point in time, I think you really need to have some, who you work with matters, and having that expertise on the team is really
Absolutely.
important. Fantastic. I will jump off of my soapbox now. um, but the last thing I kind of want to talk about before we get into kind of the missing piece for diversity, equity, and inclusion is this idea of coaching and bringing along leaders and experts, right? We've kind of talked about it a little bit up to this point, but I think I really want to get directly at it, which is this: how do you coach a CEO, an executive, a manager to a point where they understand what diversity and inclusion is, but more importantly, what to do and how it's supposed
Yeah.
to look?
Yeah. I mean, so coaching is incredibly important as an approach, first of all, because the premise is that you want to empower the chief exec or the senior leader to be able to drive change for themselves and for the organization. And if you go in and you start telling senior leaders what to do, you immediately meet a wall of defensiveness and a wall of fear because they're worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or causing offense or causing embarrassment, and and that doesn't help anybody. That just does not inspire the change that we need to see. And I always remember when I did my kind of executive coaching training that what there was this kind of important understanding that you have to meet people where they're at and then hold their hand and take them on the journey with you. And you can only do that through coaching. You can only do that through by being curious, by understanding where people are currently at, what their fears and insecurities are, what their aspirations are, where they want to go, and the step and help tease out the steps that they want to take to get to the end result. rather than being told what to do, because they'll just run in the opposite direction, unfortunately.
I think that's so true. And I really like what you said about fear. And I've found that that's
Yeah,
such a big thing for leaders, right? Is that they understand it's the right thing. And that's actually not necessarily what the problem is.
yeah,
Oftentimes getting them over the fear. And something that I always, I didn't coin it, Jason did, but it's be present,
yeah,
not perfect. And it's funny when we say that, leaders literally like, they almost tear up because it's like, look, we're not asking you to be perfect. We're not asking you to always say the right thing. We know you're going to say the wrong thing. But what's important is that we stay present
yeah,
and we move forward and we learn. And to your point, we meet them where they're at. It's just so incredibly important. I love that you
yeah. And I
said
think
that. It's
there's
so
other skills
important.
as well. Like my team and I got together recently where we were kind of brainstorming what our values of, as a team are, and the values that we want to hold ourselves accountable to. And we were kind of running through the clients that we love working with and really thinking about the qualities or attributes that they've got. And one of the things that came out was really around that humbleness and and being able to um, take ownership when if you do put your foot in it, for instance, and to say, look, what, I'm really sorry, I said the wrong thing, I put my foot in it, but you know what, I'm going to learn and we're going to move on. And whereas, but the opposite to that is somebody that gets really defensive and doesn't have that growth mindset.
I think if any of our listeners are started with a consultant and you want to be like, how do I engage in this in a really meaningful way? What Toby just said is
Yeah,
exactly how you do it. You're humble, admit when you're wrong, just say, oh, I put my foot in it. Like, and let's move on. And we're here to help. Like, we're here to help you get past that, to learn from it. And you would be surprised how many people give you a lot of grace when you just say, hey, I'm sorry. Like, didn't mean to say that. Did not mean to offend
yeah,
you. Like, I'm working on it. Versus like you saying,
yeah.
like, I don't know why you get offended by that. I don't know why, like, I didn't mean it that way. You know who
Well,
I am. I'm not like that
yeah,
person.
and you
It's a
practiced it
little different.
perfectly earlier before. Like you asked me how I like to talk about disability, and it was just a really, the way that you presented the question was just really natural, very kind, um, and that's the way to do it.
Thank you, Toby. I always think if we can't practice what we're
Yeah,
preaching, then what are we doing? Right. If we don't, I don't have all the answers to everything,
yeah.
diverse inclusion, and I
And we
won't.
get it
It's super.
wrong. I don't know about you. I get it wrong on a weekly basis. I do say the wrong thing. Sometimes it's intentional.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's not.
Yeah, exactly. I put my foot in it all the time. I love it. Well, Toby, I think that's a perfect segue to our last question here, which is the question we're known for, which is when you look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, what's the missing piece? We know there's never one missing piece, that it takes a lot of different pieces. But in your mind, what's the one thing that we should really be focusing on?
So I'm hugely biased in this question or this answer, but for me it genuinely is connecting diversity and inclusion to that business strategy or the inclusive growth piece as I've kind of framed it. Um, because so many organizations are treating it as a box ticking exercise or the ampersand, as you say, that extracurricular activity. And and the reason why I called the book Inclusive Growth was because I haven't yet met a business leader who doesn't want to grow their business or organization in one way or another. I've worked with police forces, a police force is not a commercial organization, but they want to grow. They want to have better policing outcomes. They want to be able to report better data back to government. They want to have better relationships with their community. I've worked with retailers who just frankly just want to sell more stuff on Amazon, and that's growth for them. So, first of all, the organization needs to understand how do we want to grow as a business? And then how is inclusivity going to help us accelerate that growth, do a better job at that growth, tap into new markets, better empathize with our diverse customer base. reduce the cost of our attrition or turnover by keeping our staff happy and engaged. And that's for me, that's how we connect the dots up.
Well, I co-sign everything that you just said. That is absolutely amazing. Well, Toby, before we head out, anything you'd like to promote, anywhere people can follow you?
I mean, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. So just connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a message if you want to have a chat. I've also got a website where we've got loads of information. I've got my own podcasts. There's loads of free resources on my website if you want to kind of check them out. So my website is www.mildon.co.uk.
Fantastic. Well, once again, Toby, thank you so much for coming on the Finding Diversity podcast.
You're welcome.
We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
Coming on, and thank you to our listeners. Yeah, of course. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for listening to Finding Diversity, the missing piece. You can expect new episodes monthly. And if you like the show, please subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. This helps others like you find the show. Finding Diversity, the missing piece, is powered by Cape Inclusion. It's produced by Studio D Podcast Production, directed by Prescott Wong, and hosted by me, Justus Thompson. To learn more about how you can get started and to book a demo, visit us at capeinclusion.com.